Hi, everybody. So in this video, we're going to be talking about evolution. And when we talk about evolution, there are five different evidences for evolution that we're going to focus on. And in class, you probably remember hearing them being referred to as the five fingers. So these are five evidences that prove the theory of evolution, is legit. So the first one are homologous structures. And what homologous structures are, if we look at structures, so these are arms of a bunch of different organisms. We have a human, a lizard, a cat, a whale, a frog. So if you look, we see a lot of similarities. A lot of the bone structure is very similar between all of these animals, but they have a very different function. So clearly the function of the human arm and the function of a whale, so this arm of a whale would be found in its flippers. So this whale is going to use, its flippers, aka its arm, in order to swim, where a human arm is going to be used for something totally different. And then we look over here at the bat. So this is going to be the bat, the wing of a bat. So the function or the job is different between all of these animals, but we have very different, or I'm sorry, very similar structures. So that is what a homologous structure means, is that the structures of these limbs are similar, but have very different functions. So next, we're going to look at DNA evidence. So as we know, all living organisms have a genetic code, which is DNA. So in this chart, what this chart shows us is how similar humans or cows or lizards are to these other organisms. So for instance, a human and a cow, if I were to look on this chart, there are only 9 different amino acids on this specific chromosome. So that's a very low number. So that means that humans and cows are going to be more closely related or share a more common ancestor than a human would with a lizard. And if you look here, a human and a rose are obviously going to share, the most amount of differences, or they're going to have the most amount of differences. Um, for instance, as compared to a cow or a human. So what this is showing us is that even though a human and a rose are very, very different organisms, there are still, quite a bit of similarities, and that means that we come from a common ancestor. So that's like the main takeaway from this is that the theory of evolution and looking at these five evidences are going to trace all of the origins of our organisms back to a common ancestor. If I look down here at biogeography, so I'm looking at this picture, and this picture shows a bunch of different continents and then birds that are similar on each one of those continents. And if you think back to your, human geography class, or even back in elementary school, you learned about Pangea, which was, millions of years ago, there was one massive landmass on this continent, and it was known as Pangea. And over time, due to, tectonic plates and different natural phenomenon happening, those plates started to drift apart. But if you look at all of these different types of birds, they show a lot of similarities. So the thought is that we see these organisms that are similar found on every continent. So when all the land masses were one mass, one big land mass, and that was Pangea, they all came from one common ancestor. And then as those continents drifted apart, those animals started to adapt depending upon what type of food was there, what adaptations were beneficial for them to survive. But we can trace all of these back to a single common ancestor. So that is the third finger of evolution. The fourth one is developmental homologies. And these, if we look at this picture, these are embryos. So this is after fertilization. So this is an embryo, which would be essentially a baby that is developing inside the mother. So the offspring that is developing, and these are certain stages of development. So this is just a bunch of cells. So this is really early on after conception. And then you'll see this next one. These embryos look really similar. So this is a human. We can look down here and know that this is a human. This is an ape and a chicken. So I'm going to focus on the chicken and the human. The similarities are very similar. And even if I come over here to the lizard, there's a lot of embryonic similarities between these organisms. And you and I both know that humans and lizards are, vastly different, but we can if we look at embryonic stages of development, they show a lot of similarities, which again is pointing to the fact that all of these organisms on this chart are going to date back and come from a common ancestor. So that is our theme. That is the thread that like ties all of these together, is that all of these organisms, though they are extremely different, are going to come from a common ancestor. And the fifth and final finger of evolution is the fossil record. So the fossil record shows changes in organisms over time. You guys are all familiar with fossils. We've been talking about fossils in science since you were in elementary school. And if we look at these different fossil layers, so the different colors demonstrate different layers. So the oldest ones are going to be this kind of yellowish tan color, and then the newest ones are going to be gray. But what they see is they see how these organisms change over time, and they're found in these different layers of rocks. But they can also see how they originated from very similar species. So if you look down here in the oldest rocks, these fossils look a lot more similar than you come up here to the gray rock, the newest one, where you have the skull of a large mammal. I don't know what that is. And then probably a smaller mammal. So essentially, the fossil record is going to show as we go back in time, we can see these similarities between organisms. So one thing to remember is that the 5 fingers of evolution, or those 5 different evidences for evolution, all tie back to the fact that every organism on this planet can be tied to a common ancestor.